I bought this Lenovo E73 ThinkCenter desktop for only $40, but unlike the PC on the Facebook Market listing, this didn't come with an i3-4570 or any RAM at all. In a previous video, I tested it out to see how well the included i3-4160 handled basic tasks and was somewhat surprised with what it could do. I like to find ways that older hardware can still be used, so in this video, we're going to make a few upgrades to this machine and try to turn it into a budget gaming and streaming PC, so stick around. If you've been in the budget PC space for a while, you're probably very much aware of the common method of buying a used office desktop and then upgrading components like the power supply and graphics card to build an affordable gaming PC. And that's exactly what this video is. But the goal here isn't just to play games. We'll also be using this to record or stream gameplay in 1080p using OBS. I also want to be clear about something. This isn't a guide, and you probably won't be able to buy these exact components for the prices I did. This is more of just a look at what can potentially be done with the specific components I bought with the deals I was able to find. Currently, this Lenovo has a 2-core, 4-thread i3-4160 clocked at 3.6 GHz, no RAM, a 180-watt proprietary power supply, and a 128GB SSD that we added in a previous video when covering this system. The first thing we need to get this project up and running is some RAM. I found these two 8GB 1833MHz sticks of Gale, I don't know how you say it, DDR3 on a local listing for only $20, which should work really well for this build. To play games, we obviously need a graphics card, and fortunately, I was able to find this GDDR6 version of the GTX1650 on Facebook Marketplace for only $120. This GPU might be a little bit overkill for the i3-4160, but it gives us some room to upgrade, and more importantly, features essentially the latest version of NVIDIA's NVENC encoder. This should hopefully mean that we can still get really good video quality while offloading all of the video encoding to the GPU rather than our more than likely underpowered i3 when trying to record or stream to YouTube or Twitch. Unfortunately, this model of GTX1650 isn't one that can be run off of just the 75 watts provided by the PCIe slot, so we'll also have to add in this Gigabyte 650 watt 80 plus bronze power supply that I picked up used for $30. We could definitely go with something lower powered here, but this is what I already had on hand. To make this work with the odd proprietary power connector on our Lenovo motherboard, we're going to use this adapter, which can be picked up for pretty cheap on Amazon. After all of these upgrades, our i3-4160 is probably going to be the thing holding us back the most. Fortunately, this graphics card should be able to handle all of the encoding, leaving our CPU to just try and keep up with the gaming side of things. If we wanted to spend a little bit more, we have plenty of CPU upgrade options, including something like this 4-core 8-thread Xeon E3-1231v3, but for now, we'll just see what our i3 can do. With all of our components ready, we can go ahead and start swapping things out. First, I went ahead and cut all of the zip ties, holding on some of our cables from before, so we could go ahead and unplug the SATA and SATA power cables. Then I went ahead and unplugged the power connectors from the motherboard, including the weird 14-pin Lenovo connector, and then removed the 4 screws on the back holding the power supply in, so we could take that out. To make room for all of our power supply cables that aren't modular, I decided to go ahead and take out the DVD drive so we would have a little bit more room in the case. With that out of the way, I went ahead and dropped in our 650 watt power supply and put the 4 screws back in to hold it in place. Then, after untangling some of these cables and zip tying some of the ones we're not going to use, I started just shoving everything into the drive bay to kind of get it out of the way and hopefully be able to cable manage it a little bit. Then I went ahead and plugged in our 24-pin to 14-pin adapter and fed that through the front of the case as well. Before running all of the power cables, I wanted to go ahead and add our graphics card in, so I removed the 2 covers on the PCIe slots and then dropped in our GTX 1650 and replaced the screw to hold it in place. After that, we could go ahead and slot in our 2 8GB sticks of DDR3 RAM, and then my shoulder blocked a lot of the cable management, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm still getting better at filming these, but I ran the power cables for the graphics card and motherboard, and also reattached the 128GB SSD to the case with the very secure one-screw method. With that done, I went ahead and ran our SATA power cable to the SSD, and I tried to do a little bit of cable management, but sort of gave up in this case. It's not great, but I think it's fine for the sake of this video. With that all out of the way, we could put on the front panel, as well as the side panel, and we're ready to boot this thing up. With everything put together, we can go ahead and hop into Windows and see how well this can stream some popular titles. I kept things pretty simple in OBS, streaming and recording at 1080p 60 with the NVENC encoder set to the quality preset and a bitrate of 4000 kilobits per second. I probably should have gone with a higher bitrate and maybe even the max quality preset in OBS, but the video quality we ended up with wasn't terrible. I benchmarked all of the games in this video while recording using OBS, so that we can get an idea of how well this PC can handle recording or streaming gameplay. I started things off with Hollow Knight just because it's a favorite of mine. I wasn't expecting any issues here, and we didn't get any with an average frame rate of 195 and good frame times with no stutter. Here we get the first look at the video quality, and while it's not bad, I regret not trying the encoder out on the maximum quality preset. Next, we have Rocket League. This also ran very well using the high quality settings with an average frame rate of 143 frames per second while streaming. The percent lows don't really tell the full story here, as the frame rate only really dipped significantly when goals were scored or when explosions happened. The game ran really smoothly the rest of the time, and I fully believe you could be competitive while streaming this title. Running the Java version of Minecraft on 1.18.2 was quite a struggle for the dual-core i3. With low settings and a render and simulation distance of only 4 and 8 chunks respectively, we barely managed to get 60 frames per second, with 1 and 0.1% lows of 19 and 9 frames per second. I should note that I left VSync on in hopes that the 60 frames per second cap would help smooth things out a bit. When moving between chunks, the game became noticeably choppy, and really was just not a very pleasant experience. The Bedrock version of Minecraft is known for running much better on lower-end hardware, and that was definitely the case here. I couldn't quite figure out how to turn VSync off for some reason, so we are also capped at 60 frames per second here, which the i3 managed to average. The percent lows were respectable as well, and the game felt really smooth. Next up is CSGO, which doesn't really like MSI Afterburner. So unfortunately, I don't have any overlay or benchmark results for this one. You can see the frame counter in the top left corner though, and we managed over 100 frames per second essentially the entire time, while on mostly lower settings. I am by no means a competitive CSGO player, and actually this was my very first time playing it at all, but I imagine that most people could be somewhat competitive at this performance level, so I think this system would work just fine for someone primarily looking to stream CSGO. I also never play Fortnite, but it's pretty clear that the i3-4160 can't really produce a competitive frame rate, even on low settings and using the performance mode. The average frame rate looks pretty great on paper, especially considering that I had it capped at 60 frames per second on this game as well, but the hitches and stutters were very noticeable. I was planning to say that it's unplayable, but ironically, after finding this lightsaber, I cluelessly ran around Star Wars Battlefront style, whacking at people, and eventually won. Last on the list is Valorant, which is also a game I hadn't played until this video. Similar to Fortnite, we got a really good average, and at times I had my hopes up thinking that this would be a good result for our budget system. Unfortunately though, there were moments where the game almost seemed to completely lock up, as shown by our 1 and 0.1% lows. As I expected, the i3-4160 is perfectly fine for some lightweight titles, but struggles with anything more modern or CPU intensive. Now we could upgrade it with a compatible i5, i7, or Xeon like the i3-1231v3 as I mentioned earlier. And we will. After using a tool from Lenovo's website to update to the latest BIOS version, I went ahead and dropped in the 1231, which has 4 cores and 8 threads, and has a base clock of 3.4 GHz and a boost clock of 3.8 GHz. Now these specs are almost identical to the i3-4760, which only has a slightly higher boost clock of 3.9 GHz, but the 1231 can often be found for a fraction of the price on eBay. The Xeon also doesn't include integrated graphics, but that shouldn't be an issue since we have a discrete GPU in this system. To not make this video too long, we'll only take a look at the titles that the i3 struggled with, starting with Java Minecraft. For a more enjoyable experience, I turned the render and simulation distances up to 12 chunks, and the 1231 still handled this much better than the i3 handled it at much lower settings. We're still capped at 60 frames per second, which is what we averaged, but the 1 and 0.1% lows were much better at 38 and 24 frames per second. There were still a few stutters here and there, but they were way less noticeable than before. Fortnite also ran much smoother, with a capped average of 60, 1% low of 48, and 0.1% low of 17 frames per second. The hitching and stuttering from before was pretty much gone, and I imagine we could easily turn some of the settings back up without issue. Now I accidentally messed up the benchmark in video recording, so there was a game between the last one and this one where I came in 6th, but I'm not lying. Harnessing the power of Obi-Wan's lightsaber once again, as well as some airstrikes, I managed to win another round. At this point, I think I might transition into doing just Fortnite streaming. Taking another look at Valorant, we see that the 1231 V3 smooths out all of the issues we had with the dual-core i3, providing us with an average of 162 frames per second, and 1 and 0.1% lows of 63 and 4. Although I imagine that this 0.1% came from some type of transition in a menu or between rounds or something, because I didn't notice any stutter during gameplay. Unfortunately, the high frame rate didn't make me a better gamer, so I'll probably just stick to Fortnite. The i3-4160 isn't an incredible option for a PC like this, but it still surprised me a bit that it was able to handle certain titles really well. If you found a really good deal on a pre-built with this CPU in it, you could definitely hold off on a CPU upgrade if it wasn't in the budget, depending on what games you wanted to play. If you did want to upgrade, you could pick up something like the Xeon i3-1231 V3 for around $35 used and get a massive improvement to performance, nearly identical to that of the i7-4770. If you're interested in what else this Xeon can do, make sure to get subscribed because here soon we'll be seeing how well this CPU performs in a home server. That's about it for this video though, so make sure to hit that like or dislike button before you head out, and as always, thanks for watching, stay curious, and I really hope to see you in the next one.